"Have you seen how Nathan reacts when my husband walks in?" whispered Emma, my assistant chef, leaning across the gleaming stainless steel counter where I was plating the evening special. "Like he's seen a ghost. Word is, they were college. Roommates before. You know." I looked up from the delicate arrangement of seared scallops, my focus momentarily broken. "Yes, I'm aware," I replied, my voice steady as I added a final drizzle of saffron-infused oil. "Nathan mentioned it when I hired Alex." Emma's expression shifted from excitement to confusion. She'd only been at Lumière for 3 months, not long enough to know the history, to understand why Alexander Reed, once executive chef at the prestigious Le Ciel in Manhattan, with a James Beard Award and a cookbook deal, was now taking orders from me as a line cook in my restaurant. "Oh," she hesitated, sensing there was more to the story. "Well, he seems overqualified." "I hired him," I cut in, my tone even. "Personally." I removed my glasses, carefully placing them beside the plating diagram I'd sketched earlier that morning. The restaurant was quiet in these afternoon hours before service began, the calm before the evening storm. Everyone deserves a second chance, don't they? My smile didn't quite reach my eyes. Speaking of chances, how are the preparations for the Wagner wedding tasting coming along? The conversation shifted, the subject of Alex fading as we discussed the restaurant's most lucrative catering event of the season. But even as I nodded along to Emma's updates on menu options, my mind drifted to the back prep area where the man who once vowed to love me forever was now dicing vegetables and following recipes created by the woman he'd publicly humiliated 2 years ago. The man who, on our 5th anniversary dinner at the very restaurant he was now employed at, had compared me unfavorably to his ex in every possible way. From my cooking, to my appearance, to my ambition. Not realizing the owner was sitting at the next table, hanging on every cruel word. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. The constant criticisms disguised as helpful suggestions, the way he undermined my culinary school dreams, the subtle comparisons to Vanessa, his perfect ex-girlfriend who'd left him to pursue her career in Paris. All the signs were there, but I'd been too busy building my catering business, too devoted to supporting his career while quietly nurturing my own ambitions on the side. "Olivia?" Emma's voice broke through my thoughts. "Should we go with the citrus cake or the chocolate?" "Tort for the reception." "The citrus cake," I answered quickly. "The spring flavors will complement their champagne selection." After Emma left, I found myself staring at the framed review on my office wall. The glowing write-up from the Herald that had established Lumière as one of Boston's most innovative new restaurants. Just me and my vision, brought to life through determination and the settlement money from my divorce. Alex wasn't in the picture. He'd forfeited that right when he shattered our marriage with a single drunken speech. "You'll never be half the chef Vanessa was," he'd slurred that night, champagne sloshing from his glass onto the white tablecloth. "She had real talent, real passion. You're just playing at this, Olivia. Your food lacks soul." I hadn't cried, not then. I'd sat perfectly still at our anniversary table, the untouched soufflé between us deflating slowly, mirroring my collapsing marriage. "Get out," I'd whispered, my voice deadly calm. "Get out before I forget I'm in public." He'd gone without protest, probably assuming I'd forgive him by morning as I had after all his previous honest critiques of my cooking, my appearance, my dreams. But this time was different. This time, Marguerite Delaney, owner of the restaurant and legendary chef, had heard every word from her corner table. I glanced at my watch. It was almost time for my pre-service tasting of the evening's dishes, a ritual I performed as owner and head chef of Lumière, the restaurant I'd built from the ground up after the divorce. I took my commitment to excellence seriously, tasting every special before it was offered to our guests. Today, I'd start with Alex's station. The timing was intentional. The kitchen of Lumière hummed with the precise choreography of a professional restaurant preparing for service. Sous chefs called orders, knives flashed against cutting boards, and the gentle hiss of butter hitting hot pans created a symphony familiar to anyone who had devoted their life to the culinary arts. I moved through the space with practiced authority, my black chef's coat a stark contrast to the white worn by the rest of my staff, a small but deliberate distinction. Alex stood at his station, focused intently on the row of perfectly seared duck breasts resting before him. His once confident posture had softened slightly, the arrogance that had defined him during our marriage replaced by a careful humility that still felt foreign to me. At 40, he remained handsome in a classical way. Strong jawline, intense, green eyes, thick hair now showing the first hints of silver at his temples. But the designer stubble he'd once meticulously maintained had given way to a clean-shaven face, and the designer chef's coat to the standard-issue one bearing Lumière's flame logo. "Chef inspection," I announced, my voice professional as I approached his station. He looked up, his hands momentarily stilling. "Chef," he acknowledged, the word formal in a way that never failed to create a strange sensation in my chest. 2. Years ago, he would have laughed at the idea of addressing me by this title. Now it was the only way he spoke to me within the kitchen walls. "How's the duck for tonight's special?" I asked, gesturing to the resting meat. "The rendering is complete," he replied, turning one breast to show the perfectly crisp skin. "I've adjusted the heat as you suggested last service. The fat is rendered more thoroughly without compromising the medium-rare interior." I nodded, taking the knife he offered to cut a small slice from one breast. The knife was impeccably sharpened. Alex had always been fastidious about his tools, even when he'd been dismissive of my techniques. I tasted the duck, noting the perfect balance between the crisp, seasoned exterior and the succulent meat within. "Good," I said, running a finger along the edge of his cutting board, checking for cleanliness. "And the orange reduction?" He presented a small spoon of the glossy sauce, his movements precise. The sauce was flawless as I knew it would be. Alex had always excelled at classical French techniques, even as he'd mocked my interest in incorporating global influences into traditional dishes. Now those global touches were Lumière's signature, the innovation that had earned us critical acclaim and a growing national reputation. "The balance is good," I confirmed, setting down the spoon. "The star anise adds the depth we discussed." Alex nodded, eyes downcast. "I remembered your preference for warming spices with duck. It complements the Szechuan peppercorn in the accompanying vegetables." I watched him for a moment. This man I had once loved with every fiber of my being, now standing before me in a uniform embroidered with my restaurant's name. It was a far cry from the kitchens where he'd once commanded teams of sous chefs, where food critics had praised his bold masculine approach to cuisine while dismissing my contributions as pleasant support. "The Davidson party will be seated at table 9 tonight," I said, changing the subject. 15-year anniversary. They've requested the duck specifically based on their last visit. Make sure each plate is perfect." "I understand," he replied, with a nod that conveyed both acceptance and determination. "Every plate will be excellent." I nodded once, then turned to move toward the pastry station. At the edge of Alex's workspace, I paused. "The reduction. It's better than last week. The technique is more refined." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps even a glimmer of the pride he'd once worn so easily. "Thank you, chef," he said simply. The exchange wasn't lost on the kitchen staff. Since Alex had joined Lumière 6 months ago, they'd witnessed our careful professional dance, the strained politeness between us. Most knew pieces of our history. The restaurant industry thrived on gossip after all. But few knew the full story of how Alex Reed, once heralded as the next culinary superstar, had ended up working the line in his ex-wife's kitchen. I moved through the rest of my pre-service inspection, checking each station with the same exacting standards. Nathan, My sous chef, who had once worked alongside Alex at Le Ciel before the scandal that ended his career there, gave me a knowing look as I tasted his risotto. "He's really trying, you know," Nathan said quietly as the other staff focused on their preparations. "I've never seen him this humble." "Humility is a new experience for him," I replied, adding a pinch more salt to the risotto. "Let's see how long it lasts." What I didn't say was that a small, wounded part of me wanted Alex to see what I'd built without him, wanted him to witness my success from the lowest position in my kitchen, wanted him to know that while he'd been destroying his reputation with his arrogance and his affairs, I'd been creating something extraordinary with the creativity he'd once dismissed as cute experimentation. He accepted the position 6 months ago. He had no choice. After the video of his drunken tirade against a food critic went viral, after the harassment allegations from 3 female line cooks at Le Ciel became public, after his cookbook deal evaporated and his television appearances dried up, Alex Reed had become radioactive in the culinary world he'd once dominated. I ran my kitchen with precision and care, maintaining the professional distance that had become my armor since the divorce. As service began and the first orders came in, I watched Alex work, his movements economical and focused, so different from the theatrical flourishes he'd once employed for admiring audiences. He called back orders with respect, worked cleanly, and produced plate after plate of food that met my exacting standards. It should have felt satisfying, this reversal of our positions. Instead, it left me with a complicated tangle of emotions I wasn't ready to unravel. "Olivia, your table is ready," called Michelle, my maitre d', as I emerged from the kitchen after the successful Friday night service. "Chef Delaney is already seated." I nodded, removing my chef's coat and smoothing down the simple black dress I wore underneath for such occasions. Weekly dinners with Marguerite Delaney had become a tradition since she'd invested in Lumière, a ritual I valued both professionally and personally. The dining room was nearly empty now, the last guests lingering over dessert and coffee. The soft lighting cast a warm glow over the space I'd designed with such care, elegant but unpretentious, luxurious without ostentation. Everything I'd wanted in a restaurant when I was still just a caterer with dreams of my own establishment. Marguerite sat at her usual corner table, a glass of Bordeaux already poured for each of us. At 72, she remained an imposing figure in Boston's culinary scene, her silver hair swept into an immaculate chignon, her posture perfect as she regarded the room with the sharp eyes that had missed nothing during her 40-year career. "Another excellent service," she commented as I took my seat across from her. "The duck was particularly good tonight." I sipped my wine, allowing myself to relax slightly now that the evening's work was complete. "Alex has improved his technique with the rendering." Marguerite's eyebrow arched slightly at my voluntary mention of my ex-husband. "Has he indeed? And how is our little experiment progressing, in your estimation?" I considered the question carefully. Marguerite had been the one to suggest hiring Alex when he'd reached the nadir of his downfall, not out of kindness but out of a calculated understanding of talent and opportunity. "He's adapting," I said finally. "His technical skills were never the issue." "No," Marguerite agreed, swirling her wine thoughtfully. "His character was the issue, and character, unlike knife skills, cannot be taught, only reformed through consequence." I thought back to the night that had changed everything, the 5th anniversary dinner that had become our last. Alex had been riding high on a glowing review, his ego inflated beyond its already substantial dimensions. I'd spent days planning a surprise, reservations at Maison, the restaurant where we'd had our first date, now under the ownership of Marguerite Delaney. "I have something to celebrate," I'd told him, excitement making my voice higher than usual. "I've been accepted to the advanced certification program at the Institute." His reaction had been immediate, dismissive. "That's what you're interrupting me for? Vanessa completed that certification years ago. She's teaching at the Institute. Now," I'd persisted, explaining my plan to expand our catering business, to eventually open the restaurant I'd always dreamed of. His laughter had cut deeper than any knife. A restaurant? Olivia, be realistic. You're a decent home cook who got lucky with some catering gigs. Vanessa had real vision, real technique. You should see what she's doing in Paris now. He gestured, expansively, wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim of his glass. She was better than you in every way. In the kitchen, in bed, in conversation. I settled when I married you, and we both know it. He hadn't realized Marguerite was seated nearby, hadn't noticed her sharp eyes taking in every detail of his cruelty and my stunned silence. Hadn't known that when I left the restaurant alone that night, she would follow me out, hand me her card, and say simply, "When you're ready to show him what better truly means, call me." 3 months later, with divorce papers filed and my catering business collapsing under the weight of Alex's industry connections working against me, I'd made that call. "He's asked to adjust the staff meal menu," I told Marguerite, returning to the present. "He wants to implement a rotation that educates the staff on regional cuisines." "Interesting," Marguerite murmured. "That shows consideration beyond his own station, not something the Alexander Reed of 2 years ago would have proposed." "No," I agreed. "That Alex would have considered staff meal an annoyance rather than an opportunity." Our dinner arrived. A special tasting menu prepared by Nathan and the team, dishes not from tonight's service but experiments for future menus. I recognized Alex's hand in several preparations, could see how he'd incorporated my feedback from previous tastings while adding subtle refinements that spoke to his classical training. "He's learning from you," Marguerite observed, noting my recognition of the dishes. "That may be the most significant transformation of all." The irony wasn't lost on me. For years in our marriage, Alex had dismissed my ideas while presenting them as his own in professional settings. Now, he was openly building upon my culinary perspective, acknowledging my influence rather than undermining it. The Davidson anniversary. "Dinner went well," I said, changing the subject slightly. "The couple seemed very happy." "Anniversaries," Marguerite said with a knowing look. "Such complicated celebrations, aren't they? Markers of time that force us to evaluate what has changed, what has endured." I took another sip of wine, avoiding her perceptive gaze. 2 years since my own anniversary disaster. 2 years of rebuilding and transformation. Of proving to myself, to Alex, to the culinary world that I was far more than the woman who had once stood in her husband's shadow. "I didn't hire him out of cruelty," I said suddenly, the words escaping before I could reconsider them. "I hired him because his talent deserves a kitchen, even if his character needed adjustment." Marguerite smiled slightly, the expression softening her formidable countenance. "I know, my dear. That compassion, tempered with clear expectations, is what makes you not just a good chef, but an excellent leader. Something Alexander never managed to become, despite his technical brilliance." As we finished our meal, discussing the restaurant's plans for the upcoming season, I found myself thinking about the word better, how Alex had wielded it as a weapon that night, how it had fueled my determination during the difficult months that followed, and how strangely hollow victory felt now that I had definitively proven him wrong. Better chef, better business owner, better person. I had become all these things not to spite him, but because his absence had allowed me to flourish in ways his constant comparisons had once stunted. The realization sat uncomfortably alongside the satisfaction of seeing him acknowledge my authority in the kitchen he had once assumed would never be mine. Michel stood at my front door, his small arms wrapped tightly around his dinosaur backpack, blue eyes bright with excitement as he spotted me through the window. Julia, my sister, gave me a quick kiss on the cheek as I opened the door. "He's been talking about Chef Day nonstop," she said, smoothing her nephew's unruly dark curls. "Fair warning, he's packed every toy kitchen utensil he owns." "Perfect Sue, chef material," I replied, crouching down to Michael's level. "Ready for our cooking adventure, buddy?" "I brought my whisk," he announced proudly, already unzipping his backpack, "and my apron and my hat and my spatula and—" "Whoa, slow down," I laughed, helping him with his jacket. "We have plenty of time to see all your equipment." At 5, Michel was a bundle of energy and curiosity, with my dark hair and his father's green eyes, a combination that sometimes caught me off guard when I least expected it. Alex had missed so much of our son's early development, consumed by his rising culinary career, and, as I later discovered, his affairs with at least 2 line cooks at Le Ciel. By the time our marriage imploded, Michel had grown accustomed to his father's absences, a reality that still twisted something painful inside me despite my efforts to provide enough love for 2 parents. "Go easy on yourself today," Julia advised quietly as Michel ran ahead into the apartment, already making a beeline for the kitchen. And on him. "He was asking about Alex yesterday." I sighed, unsurprised but still affected. "What did you tell him?" "That Daddy works in a restaurant too, just like Mommy." That seemed to satisfy him for now. She squeezed my arm gently. "He'll have more questions as he gets older." After Julia left, promising to return in the evening, I joined Michel in the kitchen where he was already arranging his toys on the counter, tongue caught between his teeth in concentration as he lined up plastic measuring cups by size. "What are we making today, Chef Michel?" I asked, tying a small apron around his waist, a miniature version of the ones worn at Lumière, complete with embroidered flame logo. It had been Nathan's Christmas gift to my son, a gesture that had brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Pancakes," Michel declared with absolute conviction. "But fancy restaurant pancakes, not regular ones." Excellent choice. Fancy restaurant pancakes coming up. For the next hour, we created what Michel deemed spectacular pancake towers with blueberry compote, whipped mascarpone, and maple syrup. I guided his small hands through measuring ingredients, watched him concentrate as he stirred the batter. "Not too much, Mommy, or they get tough," and felt a swell of pride as he carefully placed berries in decorative patterns. "Is my cooking good?" he asked suddenly, looking up from his meticulous berry arrangement. "It's wonderful," I assured him. "You have a natural talent for flavors and presentation." "As good as Daddy's?" The question hung in the air, innocent yet loaded. I chose my words carefully, conscious of how they might shape his understanding of both himself and his father. "Your daddy is very skilled at certain techniques, and you're developing your own special talents," I said finally. "Cooking isn't about being better or worse than someone else. It's about creating food that makes people happy and brings them together." Michel seemed to consider this, his expression serious in that particular way children have when processing adult concepts. "Does Daddy's cooking make you happy?" he asked next, the simple question cutting straight to complexities he couldn't possibly comprehend. I busied myself wiping a non-existent spill. "Your daddy and I have different cooking styles now," I replied, sidestepping the heart of his question. "Let's check if our pancakes are ready to flip." Later, as we sat at the breakfast bar enjoying our creation, Michael's face smeared with blueberry despite my best efforts with napkins, I found myself studying the features he'd inherited from Alex. The determined set of his jaw when concentrating, the slight furrow between his brows when he was thinking deeply, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed. Alex had been stunned when I told him I was pregnant, his reaction tepid where I'd expected joy. "This complicates things," he'd said, already mentally calculating how a child would affect his rising star trajectory. He'd gone through the motions of preparing for fatherhood, attending 2 of 7 prenatal appointments, assembling the crib with poorly concealed impatience, holding Michel awkwardly in the hospital for obligatory photos before disappearing to handle a crisis at the restaurant. In the early days after Michel's birth, Alex had hovered on the periphery of parenthood, more guest than participant. When Michel was colicky, crying through the night, Alex had taken to sleeping in the guest room to stay sharp for work. When I'd struggled with postpartum depression, he'd suggested I try harder to snap out of it. When Michel had taken his first steps at 14 months, Alex had been in Chicago for a guest chef appearance. It wasn't that he didn't care. In his way, I believed he loved our son. But Alex existed in a world where his needs and ambitions took precedence over everything and everyone else. Parenthood required the opposite priority structure, a concept he'd never managed to grasp. "Can we bring pancakes to Daddy?" Michel asked, jolting me from my thoughts. "At your restaurant?" I stilled, fork halfway to my mouth. "Daddy's working today, buddy. The restaurant is very busy on Saturdays." "But you're the boss," he said with the simple logic of childhood. "You can let him take a pancake break." "Even bosses have to follow certain rules," I explained, wondering how to navigate this unexpected request. "Maybe another time." Michel's face fell slightly, but he rallied quickly, resilient in the way children often are. "Okay, can we make cookies to bring to everybody at the restaurant tomorrow? For after working time?" The solution was so simple, so perfect in its innocence, that I felt a rush of love for my son's generous spirit, so different from his father's calculated charm. "That's a wonderful idea," I agreed. "We can make a big batch for all the staff." "Even for Daddy?" "Yes, even for Daddy," Michael beamed, satisfied with this compromise. "I'll decorate his special so he knows which one is from me." After breakfast, as Michel settled in for his Saturday cartoon time, I found myself staring at the family photo on my refrigerator. Just me and Michel at his preschool graduation, his gap-toothed smile wide beneath the comically large cap. Alex wasn't in the picture. He'd forfeited that right through years of emotional absence even before the final implosion of our marriage. I hadn't intended to become a single mother. When I'd dreamed of having children, I'd imagined a partner who shared the wonder and challenges equally. Instead, I'd found myself navigating pregnancy, birth, and early parenthood with increasingly minimal support. Alex's initial half-hearted efforts diminishing as Michel's needs competed with his professional demands. "He reminds me of my dad," Alex had once commented, watching 3-year-old Michel meticulously arrange his toy cars by color. "Always so damn serious about everything." It was the closest he'd ever come to acknowledging his own paternal shortcomings, a rare moment of self-reflection that had briefly made me hope for change. That hope had died at our anniversary dinner, along with any illusions I still harbored about our marriage. My phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. "Menu meeting still on for 3 p.m.? Alex asked to present an idea for new spring appetizer." I typed, a quick confirmation, experiencing the now familiar dissonance of Alex's name appearing in professional contexts. 6 months into his employment at Lumière, I was still adjusting to the strange reality we'd created. A delicate ecosystem where personal history was suspended in favor of professional boundaries, where the man who had once compared me unfavorably to his ex was now deferring to my culinary judgment. The arrangement existed primarily for Michel's sake. After Alex's public downfall, after watching him struggle for over a year to find any position in the industry he'd once dominated, I'd made the difficult decision to offer him a lifeline, not out of lingering affection, but to ensure Michel's father could provide child support and maintain some stability in his visitation schedule. It was, I told myself repeatedly, a practical decision that benefited everyone involved. Michel received financial support and consistent contact with his father. The restaurant gained a technically skilled line cook. Alex got a chance to rebuild his shattered reputation. What I didn't admit, even to myself, was the small, wounded part of me that found satisfaction in our reversed positions, in watching Alex acknowledge my authority in the world he'd once claimed I could never truly understand. The menu meeting convened in Lumière's private dining room, afternoon. Sunlight streaming through tall windows onto the polished oak table where we gathered each week to discuss seasonal changes and special events. Nathan had arranged sample plates around the table, small tastes of potential additions and refinements to our spring offerings. My core team was already seated: Emma, Nathan, Darius the pastry chef, and Simone, our beverage director. Alex arrived last, carrying a small tray with what appeared to be delicate amuse-bouche portions of something I couldn't immediately identify. He hesitated fractionally upon entering, clearly gauging the appropriate place to sit in this gathering that blurred the lines between the professional and personal histories around the table. "Sorry I'm late," he said, placing his tray carefully among the other samples. "The prep took longer than expected." "We're just getting started," I replied evenly, gesturing to the empty chair across from me rather than the one directly at my small boundaries, clearly defined. As Nathan began his presentation on spring produce availability, I observed Alex unobtrusively. He took meticulous notes, his concentration absolute in a way it had never been during our marriage when I'd spoken about menu ideas. Back then, he'd half-listened at best, usually interrupting with improvements before I'd finished articulating my thoughts. The Alex seated across from me now was different, quieter, more reflective. His former performance of culinary bravado replaced by something that looked almost like genuine humility. "Chef Olivia," Nathan said, breaking into my thoughts. "Alex has developed an interesting spring appetizer concept. I thought it might work well for the Richards wedding tasting next week." I nodded for Alex to proceed, curious despite myself. Since joining Lumière, he'd been careful to work within the parameters I established, executing my menu with technical excellence, but rarely suggesting his own concepts. This represented a step outside the careful pattern we'd established. "It's a play on traditional spring flavors," Alex began, sliding his samples toward the center of the table. Chilled pea soup with mint oil, but served as a small sphere using reverse spherification. When broken, it releases over a base of crab salad with preserved lemon and microgreens. The technique was impressive. Molecular gastronomy had never been Alex's preferred style during our marriage. He'd dismissed it as culinary gimmickry when I'd expressed interest in exploring it. Yet here he was, presenting a dish that seamlessly incorporated the technique into something that felt aligned with Lumière's ethos. "The inspiration came from your Mediterranean Nordic fusion approach," he continued, not quite meeting my eyes. "I noticed how customers respond to the textural surprises in your halibut dish and thought this could create a similar moment of discovery. Your approach, your dish, the careful attribution of credit, so unlike the Alex who had once presented my ideas as his own without a second thought, caught me off guard." Around the table, I caught the quick exchanged glances among my staff, their recognition of the significance not lost on me. "Let's taste it," I said, maintaining my professional demeanor despite the unexpected emotions his presentation had stirred. The dish was exquisite, technically perfect, beautifully balanced, with the bright clarity of spring captured in each element. It was also, I realized with an unsettling jolt, a culinary response to a conversation we'd had in the early days of our marriage, before Michel, before Le Ciel, before everything soured. We'd been walking through a farmer's market, debating the best way to showcase early spring peas, and I'd mentioned the concept of containing their essence in an unexpected form. "The texture transition works beautifully," I commented, careful to keep my assessment strictly professional. "The brightness of the peas against the richness of the crab creates a compelling contrast." Alex nodded, a flicker of what might have been relief crossing his features. "I've been experimenting with this technique during prep hours. Nathan suggested it might fit with the spring menu concept." Nathan, I noticed, was watching our interaction, with poorly disguised interest. As my sous chef and Alex's former colleague, he occupied a unique position in our complicated dynamic, close enough to understand the history, professional enough to remain tactfully neutral. "It's excellent work," I acknowledged, addressing both of them. "Let's include it in the wedding tasting menu and gauge the response." The meeting continued, covering upcoming reservations, staff scheduling, and the logistics of a charity event we were hosting the following month. Throughout, Alex participated judiciously, offering input when appropriate but never overstepping, never attempting to dominate the conversation as he once would have. When he suggested modifications to other dishes, they were framed as questions, rather than declarations, a fundamental shift in approach that I couldn't help but notice. "Before we conclude," I said as the meeting drew to a close, "Michel has made cookies for the staff. He'll be bringing them tomorrow after service." Something flickered across Alex's face, surprise, perhaps even a muted joy. That's very thoughtful of him. "He specifically mentioned wanting to make one for you," I added, the words emerging before I could reconsider them. "He plans to decorate it specially." Alex looked down at his notebook, a muscle working in his jaw. When he raised his head again, his eyes held an emotion I hadn't seen in years. Not since the early days of Michel's life when, despite his struggles with fatherhood, there had been moments of genuine connection. "Please thank him for me," he said quietly. "I look forward to it." As the team dispersed, Nathan lingered, helping me gather the tasting dishes and sample menus. When we were alone, he leaned against the table with the casual familiarity of our long professional relationship. "That went well," he observed neutrally, though his expression suggested deeper currents. "The spring menu is coming together nicely," I agreed, deliberately misinterpreting his comment. Nathan raised an eyebrow. "You know that's not what I meant. Alex's dish. Did you recognize what it was?" I busied myself organizing my notes. "A technically accomplished spring appetizer that will appeal to our clientele." "Olivia," Nathan said gently. "It's the dish you described in that interview 3 years ago, the one where you talked about your culinary dreams while you were still catering. The interviewer asked what you would create if you had your own restaurant, and you described that exact flavor combination." I stilled, memory rushing back. It had been a small profile in a local food magazine published just before our anniversary disaster. Alex had dismissed it as cute local press, not real coverage like his features in national publications. I'd brought a copy to our anniversary dinner, excited to share it with him, but had never gotten the chance before everything imploded. "He's trying," Nathan continued when I remained silent. "In his own way, he's acknowledging your vision." "Not that it makes up for anything," he added quickly. "Just an observation." "Noted," I replied, my tone making it clear I didn't wish to pursue this line of conversation. "Please make sure the kitchen is prepared for the Richards tasting. I want everything perfect." After Nathan left, I remained in the empty dining room, sunlight now casting longer shadows across the table. The sampler of Alex's dish sat before me, its technical excellence undeniable, its symbolic implications unsettling. In creating this specific dish, Alex had communicated something beyond professional respect. He had demonstrated, not just that he was learning from me now, but that perhaps he had been listening all along, even when I'd thought my words were falling on indifferent ears. The realization was disconcerting, challenging the narrative I'd constructed around our failed marriage. If he had heard me, had valued my culinary perspective enough to remember it years later, why had he been so dismissive, so cruel? Why had he compared me so relentlessly to Vanessa if some part of him had recognized my unique vision? The complexity of these questions, and my reluctance to confront them, sent me reaching for my phone, scrolling to my sister's contact information. "Can you keep Michel an extra hour tonight?" I asked when she answered. "I need to go for a run before picking him up." Running had become my therapy in the aftermath of the divorce, the physical exertion clearing my mind when emotional tangles became too constricting. Today, I needed that clarity more than usual, because watching Alex present that particular dish, with its connection to a conversation I'd assumed he'd forgotten, had triggered something unexpected. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the first crack in the wall of certainty I'd built around my understanding of our shared past. The back office of Lumière was quiet save for the distant clatter of early prep work in the kitchen. I scrolled through supplier invoices on my laptop, confirming deliveries for the upcoming week while trying to focus on numbers rather than the lingering questions from yesterday's menu meeting. A knock on the door interrupted my concentration. "Delivery for you, chef," called Simone, poking her head in. "Not food-related." She entered carrying an elegant arrangement of tulips and cherry blossoms in a simple ceramic vase, spring colors mirroring the season's first offerings. I frowned slightly, checking my calendar for any special occasion I might have forgotten. "Who sent them?" I asked, moving invoices aside to make space on my desk. Simone shrugged, setting down the arrangement. "Cards sealed. Secret admirer, perhaps?" Her tone was light, but her eyes held a question she was too professional to voice directly. After she left, I examined the small envelope tucked among the blooms. Inside was a card bearing a brief message in familiar handwriting. "Congratulations on the James Beard nomination. You've earned this recognition through vision and perseverance. It's long overdue." I sat back, card in hand, emotions cycling through me in quick succession. The James Beard nominations had been announced yesterday. Lumière for Best. New Restaurant Myself for Rising Star Chef. Nathan had opened champagne after service, the entire staff celebrating what they viewed as validation of our collective work. Alex had joined the toast, but remained in the background, raising his glass with the others while maintaining a careful distance. The flowers were unexpected, crossing one of the unwritten boundaries we'd maintained since he'd joined Lumière's staff. Our interactions had remained strictly professional, confined to kitchen matters and the occasional necessary conversation about Michelle. This gesture felt different, personal in a way that complicated our carefully constructed workplace. Dynamic. More unsettling than the flowers themselves was the message. Long overdue, suggested recognition of my talents predating Lumière, acknowledgement that perhaps he had seen my potential even during the years he'd seemingly dismissed it. The idea challenged the narrative I'd constructed, the understanding that had helped me process our failed marriage and move forward. My phone buzzed with a text from Julia. "Michel asking if he can have dinner at the restaurant tonight. Says he wants to give cookies to everyone. Up for small visitors?" I welcomed the distraction, quickly confirming that Michelle could come after the dinner rush. Family meals happened in the break room at 10 p.m., once the last diners had departed, and the kitchen was being cleaned for the night. Michel could distribute his cookies then, with minimal disruption to service. The afternoon proceeded with the familiar rhythm of a restaurant preparing for evening service. Deliveries arriving, prep lists being completed, staff gradually filling the kitchen as afternoon shifted to evening. I moved through it all with practiced efficiency, pushing thoughts of Alex's flowers to the background as I focused on the details that would ensure another successful service. Alex arrived at 4, earlier than his scheduled start time, and immediately set to work on his station without being asked. I observed him from the corner of my eye as I finalized the night's specials with Nathan, noting how seamlessly he'd integrated into the kitchen's routines, despite the complicated history lingering beneath the surface. "Heard about the flowers," Nathan murmured as we reviewed the reservation list, identifying VIPs and dietary restrictions. "Appropriate gesture or crossing a line?" I shot him a look that clearly communicated this wasn't appropriate pre-service conversation. "Focus on the Miyazaki party, please. They're celebrating an anniversary and specifically requested your duck preparation." Nathan nodded, accepting the redirection, though his expression suggested the topic wasn't permanently closed. Table 15. At 8. I've already prepped the components for the tableside presentation. Before service began, I gathered the staff for our nightly meeting, reviewing specials and potential challenges. The restaurant is fully booked, with several large parties. Pacing will be critical tonight. Communication between stations needs To be flawless. I glanced around the circle of focused faces. Also, my son will be visiting after service to share cookies he's made for everyone. Family meal will be delayed until 10:30 to accommodate this. A ripple of smiles spread through the staff. Michael had become something of a mascot during his occasional visits, his earnest interest in cooking and wide-eyed admiration of the kitchen staff making him a welcome presence. I caught Alex's gaze briefly across the circle, finding something soft in his expression before he schooled his features back to professional attention. "Station's ready in 15 minutes, I concluded. "Let's make it another perfect service." The evening unfolded with the controlled chaos of a successful restaurant at capacity. Orders flowed steadily from the dining room, each station executing their components with precision before plates assembled under my final inspection at the pass. Alex worked with quiet intensity, his station organized with military precision, each plate emerging exactly to specification. During a brief lull between seating times, I found myself at his station, ostensibly checking on preparation for the next rush. "Thank you for the flowers," I said quietly, keeping my eyes on the plates rather than his face. It was a thoughtful gesture. "You deserve the recognition," he replied, his voice equally low. I meant what I wrote. A moment of silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken complications. I had expected to feel triumphant when industry accolades finally came my way, vindicated after years of having my talents questioned. Instead, the nomination had triggered an unexpected melancholy, awareness of how much I'd once wanted to share, such moments with the man now working at a station in my kitchen. "Michel is excited about bringing his cookies," I said, changing the subject to safer territory. Something like genuine happiness crossed Alex's features. "He mentioned it during our phone call yesterday. Apparently mine has dinosaur sprinkles." The casual reference to their ongoing relationship, phone calls on days when physical visitation wasn't scheduled, caught me off guard. In the early aftermath of our separation, Alex's contact with Michelle had been inconsistent at best, limited to the court-mandated visitation schedule and often truncated by unavoidable work commitments. That he now made additional efforts to maintain connection with our son represented yet another shift I was still adjusting to. "He's been planning it all week," I confirmed, then added without fully examining my motivation. "He has your focus when he's interested in something." Alex looked up, surprise evident in his expression at what could be interpreted as a compliment. "He has your creativity," he countered softly, "and your kindness." Before I could respond, Nathan called from the pass. 2 tables just seated, orders coming in. The moment dissolved as we returned to the professional rhythm of service, the brief personal exchange submerged beneath the demands of the kitchen. For the next 3 hours, we existed in the perfect synchronicity of a well-run restaurant at peak performance. Communications reduced to essential information, movements economical and purposeful, the dance of culinary creation superseding personal histories. By 9:30, the dining room had begun to empty, the kitchen transitioning to cleanup mode as final desserts were served and coffee orders fulfilled. I was reviewing the night's performance with Emma when Michelle's voice echoed from the entrance to the kitchen. "Mommy, I brought the cookies," he called, his excitement cutting through the professional atmosphere. Julia stood behind him, an apologetic expression suggesting his enthusiasm had overcome their agreement to enter quietly. Michel bounded toward me, a large container clutched in his small arms, his entire face alight with pride. "I decorated them all differently. There's enough for everybody." The kitchen staff paused in their cleanup efforts, smiles breaking out across tired faces at Michel's infectious energy. He had always had this effect, the ability to remind culinary professionals, often jaded by long hours and demanding work, of the simple joy their creations could bring. "Let's set them up in the break room," I suggested, guiding him toward the back. "Everyone will come when they finish cleaning their stations." As we passed Alex's station, Michelle stopped abruptly. "Daddy, I made your cookie first. It has dinosaurs and stars because you said those were your favorites when you were little like me. The simple declaration, laden with the innocent assumption that of course his father's cookie would receive special attention, created a momentary stillness. In the kitchen, Alex crouched down to Michelle's level, his expression soft in a way I'd rarely witnessed during our marriage. "That sounds amazing, buddy," he said, his voice gentle. "I can't wait to see it. Can I help you set up in the break room?" Michelle nodded, enthusiastically, transferring the precious container to his father's care before reaching for my hand. "Mommy too, both of you." The three of us walking together toward the break room, Michelle swinging between us with his hands clasped in ours, created an image so reminiscent of the family we had never truly been that I felt an unexpected tightness in my throat. Around us, the staff carefully averted their eyes, focusing intently on their cleanup tasks while undoubtedly registering every detail of this unusual family tableau. In the break room, Michelle directed the cookie arrangement with the seriousness of a chef plating a signature dish, insisting each staff member's specially decorated cookie be positioned exactly right. Alex followed his instructions with solemn attention, asking clarifying questions about placement that delighted our son with their respect for his creative vision. Watching them together, Alex's patient responses to Michelle's excited chatter, the careful way he helped without taking over, the genuine interest he showed in our son's explanations. I found myself confronting uncomfortable questions about the narrative I'd constructed around Alex as a father. Julia cornered me in my office after Michelle had distributed his cookies to the delighted staff, each recipient making appropriately impressed comments about their personalized designs. The break room had transformed into an impromptu celebration, the formality of kitchen hierarchy temporarily suspended as line cooks and dishwashers chatted with sous chefs over cookies and coffee. "That was interesting to watch," she observed, closing my office door to create a pocket of privacy amid the restaurant's winding down energy. "The three of you together." I busied myself with paperwork, avoiding her perceptive gaze. Michel was happy to share his baking with everyone. That's not what I meant, and you know it. Julia settled into the chair across from my desk, clearly preparing for the kind of sisterly interrogation I'd been successfully avoiding for months. Alex is different with him now, more present, more attentive. The observation struck uncomfortably, close to thoughts I'd been trying to suppress. "He's making an effort," I acknowledged cautiously. "It's good for Michelle." "And the flowers?" Julia pressed. "Nathan mentioned them when I arrived. That seems like more than co-parenting courtesy." I set down my pen with a sigh. It was a professional acknowledgement of the James Beard nomination, nothing more. "Olivia." My sister's tone carried the weight of our lifelong connection, the ability to see through deflections that had served me well with everyone else. "What's really happening here? 6 months ago, you could barely say his name without that little muscle in your jaw twitching. Now he's sending flowers and helping Michelle arrange cookies, and you're watching him with this expression I can't quite figure out." The question hung between us, demanding a level of honesty I wasn't sure I was ready to articulate, even to myself. What was happening? What explained the subtle shift in dynamics, the increasing comfort of our professional interactions, the moments when our shared history felt less like an open wound and more like a complicated map of territory we'd both survived? "I don't know," I admitted finally. "It's evolving." Julia's eyebrows rose. "Evolving into what, exactly?" "Not what you're thinking," I said quickly. "Just, the situation is more complex than I anticipated when I hired him. Because he's actually good at taking direction from you? Because he's showing up for Michelle in ways he never did before? Or because you're starting to wonder if the man who works in your kitchen now is fundamentally different from the one who humiliated you 2 years ago?" Each question hit with uncomfortable precision, forcing me to confront the shifting landscape of my feelings about Alex's presence at Lumière. What had begun as a practical arrangement driven by concern for Michelle's stability had evolved into something I hadn't expected. A daily reminder that people could change in meaningful ways, that the characteristics I'd believed were fundamental to Alex's character might actually have been symptoms of a particular context rather than immutable traits. He created a dish for the spring menu, I said after a long pause. It was based on an idea I mentioned years ago, something he dismissed at the time as impractical. Now he's not only executed it beautifully, but credited me as the inspiration. Julia studied me carefully. And that matters to you. It shouldn't, I replied, frustration evident in my voice. After everything, it shouldn't matter at all what he thinks of my culinary ideas or whether he finally recognizes what I've been capable of all along. But it does. I met my sister's gaze, finding no judgment there, only the patient understanding that had helped me through the darkest days after my marriage collapsed. Yes, I admitted quietly. It does. That doesn't make you weak, Olivia. It makes you human. Julia reached across the desk to cover my hand with hers. Validation matters, especially from people who once withheld it. Outside my office, I could hear Michelle's high-pitched laughter mingling with the deeper tones of the kitchen staff, the sound of my personal and professional worlds colliding in ways I'd never anticipated when I'd hired Alex 6 months ago. Through the partially opened blinds, I caught glimpses of Alex listening intently to something Michelle was explaining, his focus absolute in a way it had rarely been during our marriage. He's not the same, I said, voicing the observation that had been forming gradually over months of watching him in my kitchen. The arrogance, the competitiveness, the dismissiveness, they're gone. Or at least, dramatically reduced. People can change, Julia agreed cautiously, especially when they lose everything and have to rebuild from scratch. But how do you know if the change is genuine? If it will last? These were the questions that kept me awake at night, the uncertainties that made me maintain professional distance despite the increasingly undeniable evidence of Alex's transformation. You don't, Julia replied simply. That's the risk of second chances. Before I could respond, a soft knock interrupted us. Nathan stood in the doorway, his expression apologetic. Sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation in the kitchen you should probably handle. What kind of situation? I asked, immediately shifting into chef mode, mentally cataloging potential crises from equipment failures to staff conflicts. Nathan hesitated, glancing between me and Julia. It's Vanessa Laurent. She's here, asking to speak with you. The name hit like a physical blow, instantly transporting me back to that anniversary dinner, to Alex's voice slurring, Vanessa was better in every way, as our marriage disintegrated across a white tablecloth. Vanessa Laurent, the ex-girlfriend, the perpetual comparison, the woman whose ghost had haunted our relationship from its earliest days. Vanessa is here? Now? I managed, my voice steady despite the sudden hammering of my heart. In my restaurant? She says she's in town for a culinary conference. Recognized Michelle from photos Alex had shown her in the past, apparently. She's waiting by the bar. Nathan shifted uncomfortably. Alex doesn't know she's here yet. He's still in the break room with Michelle. Julia straightened, protective instincts visibly engaging. I'll take Michelle home right now. He doesn't need to be part of whatever this is. I nodded gratefully, mind racing to process this unexpected development. Vanessa Laurent had existed, for me primarily as a concept rather than an actual person, the idealized ex-girlfriend against whom I had been perpetually measured and found wanting. The thought of facing her in reality, in my restaurant, with Alex and Michelle nearby, created a complex tangle of emotions I struggled to sort through. Tell her I'll be out in 5 minutes, I decided, smoothing my chef's coat with hands that remained remarkably steady despite the internal turbulence. And Julia, I know, my sister interjected. Get Michelle out without him realizing anything's happening. I've got it. After they left, I took a moment to gather myself, breathing deeply, the way I'd learned during the most stressful services. The irony wasn't lost on me. After 2 years of rebuilding my life and career, of proving definitively that I was not inferior to Vanessa Laurent in any metric that mattered, I would finally meet the woman who had unwittingly played such a significant role in my divorce. What did she want? Why appear now when Alex had surely lost any professional value to her culinary ambitions? Was this a courtesy call, a curiosity, or something more complicated? Only one way to find out. I left my office, moving through the kitchen with deliberate calm, nodding to staff members still enjoying Michelle's cookies. In the break room doorway, I caught Alex's eye briefly, finding questions there that matched my own. He'd clearly spotted Julia leaving with Michelle, an unplanned deviation from our usual routine. The bar area was nearly empty, just one server cleaning glassware and a solitary figure perched on a stool, examining the wine list with professional interest. Even from behind, I recognized her from the culinary magazines. Tall and elegantly slim, blonde hair cut in a sleek bob that emphasized high cheekbones, and the kind of bone structure that photographed beautifully for chef profiles. Vanessa. Laurent? I approached with the confidence I'd cultivated as Lumiere's owner and head chef, extending my hand professionally. I'm Olivia Chen. Welcome to Lumière. She turned, setting down the wine list to take my offered hand. Up close, she was even more striking, classically beautiful in a way that made me instantly conscious of my own appearance. Hair hastily tucked behind my ears after a long service. Chef's coat bearing minor evidence of the evening's work. Chef Chen, she replied, her French accent subtle but present. Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. Your restaurant is magnificent. I've heard wonderful things about your Nordic Mediterranean approach. The genuine professional? Respect in her voice caught me off guard. I'd spent so long imagining her as a rival that the reality of her as a colleague required mental adjustment. Thank you, I said, sliding onto the stool beside her with outward composure. Nathan mentioned you're in town for a conference? Yes, I'm presenting on traditional French techniques in modern global cuisine. She smiled slightly. I believe we're both on the James Beard nomination list this year. Congratulations on that. Your work deserves the recognition. Each polite professional comment further disoriented me, challenging the adversarial narrative I'd constructed around Vanessa Laurent over years of hearing about her perfection. How did one have a civilized conversation with the woman whose supposed superiority had been weaponized against one's self-confidence? What can I do for you, Chef Laurent? I asked directly, deciding that professional forthrightness was the only tenable approach. I assume this isn't simply a social call between colleagues. Vanessa's expression shifted, a flicker of discomfort crossing her composed features. No, she agreed. It's about Alex. I understand he's working here. He is, I confirmed, maintaining my professional demeanor despite the sudden tension coiling in my stomach. He's been part of our kitchen team for 6 months. Vanessa nodded, her fingers tracing the stem of the water glass the bartender had placed before her. That's what I heard. Industry gossip travels quickly. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. I wanted to speak with you directly because I know my name has complicated history between you and Alex. An understatement so profound it nearly made me laugh. My name has complicated history. As though she'd been a minor character in our marital drama rather than the gold standard against which I'd been unfavorably measured for years. I appreciate your directness, I replied neutrally. What specifically did you want to discuss? First, I want to apologize, she said, surprising me. Not for anything that happened during our relationship, that ended cleanly years before he met you, but for how he used me as a comparison throughout your marriage. It was unfair to both of us. I stilled, unprepared for this acknowledgement. How do you know about that? Alex contacted me after his public meltdown at Le Ciel. He was trying to make amends as part of his recovery process. She met my gaze directly. He was very honest about the ways he'd harmed people, including how he'd weaponized his relationship with me against you. Recovery. The word registered like a discordant note in an otherwise familiar melody. Recovery from what, exactly? You didn't know? Vanessa looked genuinely surprised. I assumed since you hired him. She hesitated, then continued carefully. Alex has been in recovery for alcoholism for nearly 18 months. It was apparently a significant factor in his behavior during your marriage, though obviously not an excuse for it. The revelation landed like a physical blow, forcing me to rapidly reassess countless memories through this new lens. The work drinks that left him increasingly volatile as our marriage progressed. The champagne at our anniversary dinner that had loosened. His tongue for the cruel comparisons. The bottle of scotch that had become a nightly ritual during his rise at Le Ciel. I didn't know, I said finally, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. He never said anything about recovery when I offered him the position. That's consistent. With his approach, Vanessa nodded. He's been very firm about not using his sobriety as a shield or explanation for past behavior. He believes, rightly I think, that addiction may explain certain actions but doesn't excuse them. The bar area suddenly felt too exposed for this conversation, too public for the recalibration of understanding happening within me. Would you mind continuing this in my office? Once settled in the relative privacy of my small office, Vanessa's professional composure softened slightly. I should clarify that Alex and I haven't been in contact for years before his recovery outreach. Our relationship ended badly, mainly due to the same behaviors you likely experienced. The competitiveness, the ego, the inability to celebrate others' success without feeling diminished. Why are you telling me this? I asked directly. What's your interest in Alex's situation now? Professional curiosity initially, she admitted. When I heard he was working here, for you, it seemed so improbable I almost didn't believe it. But being in Boston for the conference, seeing your restaurant's success, she gestured vaguely. I suppose I wanted to understand how this arrangement came to be, and whether his recovery was genuine. And now that you've seen Lumière? Spoken with me? Vanessa considered the question thoughtfully. Now, I think perhaps the universe has a sense of irony, or justice. The man who once couldn't recognize the talent of the woman he married is now learning from her professionally. Before I could respond, a knock at the door interrupted us. Alex stood in the doorway, his expression a complex mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been shame. Vanessa, he said, his voice carefully controlled. This is unexpected. Alex? She nodded, her posture straightening imperceptibly. You're looking well. Sobriety agrees with you. His gaze flickered briefly to me, clearly gauging how much had been shared. 18 months next week, he confirmed quietly. An awkward silence descended. 3 people connected by complicated histories now occupying the same small space. I found myself studying Alex with new awareness, reevaluating the changes I'd observed over the past 6 months through the additional context of recovery. I should go, Vanessa said, rising gracefully. I've taken enough of Chef Chen's time, and you both likely have post-service work to complete. Actually, I heard myself saying, I think we should continue this conversation. Perhaps not here, not now, but I looked between them, these 2 people who represented such different chapters of Alex's life. I think there's value in clarity. Alex's expression shifted to cautious surprise. I'm open to that if you both are. Vanessa nodded, retrieving a business card from her bag and placing it on my desk. I'm in Boston until Sunday. My schedule is flexible. She moved toward the door, then paused. Your son has your eyes, by the way. And your spirit, I think. The way he commanded the kitchen with those cookies, that was pure Olivia Chen confidence. After she left, Alex remained in the doorway, uncertainty evident in his posture. "I should have told you about the recovery," he said finally. "I didn't want it to seem like an excuse." "I understand that now," I replied, processing this new information alongside everything else I'd learned tonight. "But I think there are several conversations we need to have. About Michelle, about your recovery, about—" I gestured vaguely, encompassing the complex reality of our current situation. "All of this, I agree," he said quietly. "Whenever you're ready." As he turned to leave, I called after him. "The dish you presented yesterday, the pea sphere with crab, it was exceptional work." He paused, surprise evident in his expression at the unexpected compliment. "Thank you. I learned the technique from one of your published interviews, actually, where you talked about containing essence in unexpected forms. And there it was, the final confirmation of what I'd begun to suspect during yesterday's menu meeting, that Alex had not only heard my culinary ideas during our marriage, but had remembered them, had carried them with him through his downfall and recovery, had finally found the humility to acknowledge their value. We've both learned a lot since then, I observed, leaving open the question of what exactly we'd learned and where that knowledge might lead us. Sunday afternoon found me at a quiet cafe several blocks from Lumière, seated at an outdoor table as spring sunshine warmed the air. I'd chosen neutral territory for this conversation, somewhere neither personal nor professional, where we could speak openly without the weight of our shared spaces pressing down. Vanessa arrived first, elegant even in casual attire, her approach to the table marked by the confident posture of someone accustomed to commanding professional respect. "Chef Chen," she greeted me, sliding into the chair across from mine. "Olivia, please," I responded, pouring her a cup from the teapot I'd already ordered. "This isn't a professional meeting." She accepted the cup with a nod. "Then I'm Vanessa, though I admit I'm still trying to understand what exactly this meeting is." A fair question. After she'd left Lumière 2 nights ago, I'd spent hours processing the new context she'd provided about Alex's recovery, trying to integrate it with my own observations of his changed behavior over the past 6 months. I'd eventually texted her, suggesting this meeting before her departure from Boston, my motivations not entirely clear even to myself. "Clarity," I said finally, echoing my words from our previous conversation. "I think we both have pieces of a puzzle that might make more sense when shared." "Alex's puzzle," she clarified. "In part," I acknowledged, "but also the puzzle of how 2 accomplished women allowed themselves to be diminished by the same man, albeit in different ways." Something like recognition flickered across her features. "You've been thinking about the comparisons." "It's hard not to, when you've been the unfavorable side of them for years." I met her gaze directly. "You were the impossible standard, the perfect chef with perfect technique who'd never sacrifice quality for accessibility." Vanessa's laugh held no humor. While in my narrative, I was the career-obsessed woman who wasn't warm enough, wasn't nurturing enough to satisfy his need for domestic perfection. When we dated, he frequently mentioned how much he wanted a partner who would prioritize home and family alongside career. "Like me," I realized aloud. "Like you," she confirmed. "The woman who could supposedly balance it all, who had the talent but also the warmth he claimed I lacked." The irony sat between us like a third presence at the table, how each of us had been positioned as the other's superior in the exact qualities we supposedly lacked. A masterful manipulation that had nothing to do with either of us, and everything to do with Alex's own insecurities. "He was threatened," I said, understanding crystallizing as I spoke, "by both of us, in different ways." "Perpetually," Vanessa agreed. "By my professional recognition in the early days, then by your innate talent once that recognition became less novel to him. He couldn't simply appreciate either quality. He had to position them as opposing virtues, with one of us always found wanting." We fell silent as Alex approached the cafe, his expression revealing his awareness of the unusual nature of this meeting. He hesitated briefly before taking the remaining chair, forming our strange triangle. "Thank you both for suggesting this," he said, his voice holding none of the defensive edge that would have characterized similar conversations during our marriage. "I know it can't be easy." "It's necessary," I replied, studying him with new awareness. Sober for 18 months, recovering not just from alcoholism but from the destructive patterns it had fueled, working in a position far below his former status, yet approaching it with a humility that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. Vanessa shifted slightly, professional composure momentarily giving way to a more personal directness. "I've been explaining to Olivia how you presented each of us to the other, how I was apparently the perfect chef lacking nurturing qualities, while she was apparently the perfect nurturer lacking professional edge." Alex flinched visibly, acceptance, rather than denial in his expression. The classic Madonna whore complex, my therapist calls it, the inability to see women as complete human beings with both strength and softness. He looked between us. "It was never about either of you. It was about my own insecurity, my inability to feel secure unless I was positioning myself as the arbiter between competing virtues." The frank self-assessment, delivered without expectation of absolution, marked perhaps the most profound evidence of change I'd witnessed. The Alex I'd married would have deflected, rationalized, or counterattacked when confronted with his psychological patterns. This Alex sat with the discomfort, owning it without excuse. "And the drinking exacerbated it." I said, "Not quite a question." "The drinking fueled it," he corrected gently. "But the core issues were there regardless. The alcohol just removed the filters, amplified the insecurities." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "What I said at our anniversary dinner, comparing you unfavorably to Vanessa, that wasn't a new thought created by champagne. It was an existing pattern of thinking that the alcohol simply gave me permission to verbalize." The admission hurt, but it also offered a strange relief, confirmation that the cruelty I'd experienced hadn't been an isolated incident, but part of a deeper problem that had nothing to do with my actual worth. "When did you realize you needed recovery?" Vanessa asked, her tone professional but not unkind. "After the video went viral," Alex replied, referencing the public meltdown that had effectively ended his career at Le Ciel. "I watched myself on screen, drunk and belligerent, attacking that critic with language so similar to what I'd used with Olivia at our anniversary dinner. It was like seeing myself from outside, finally. I checked into rehab the next day." Thought back to that period, the industry gossip about Alex's spectacular fall, the assumption that his anger had been fueled by entitlement rather than addiction. I'd felt vindicated then, seeing public confirmation of the behavior I'd experienced privately. Now, that vindication was complicated by deeper understanding. "Why didn't you mention the recovery when I offered you the position at Lumière?" I asked, the question that had lingered since Vanessa's revelation. Alex's expression turned thoughtful. "Pride, partly. Not wanting to seem like I was using sobriety to curry favor or forgiveness." He hesitated. "And fear that you might think I was implying my behavior during our marriage wasn't really me, but just the alcohol talking. I needed to own that it was all me. The insecurity, the comparisons, the cruelty. The alcohol didn't create those tendencies. It just removed my inhibitions about expressing them." The conversation at the cafe stretched into late afternoon, the three of us navigating the complex terrain of shared history with a frankness that would have been impossible to. Years earlier, Vanessa departed first, catching a cab to the airport with a professional handshake for each of us and a look that contained both closure and curious speculation about what might follow in her absence. Alex and I remained at the table, the awkwardness of our unusual situation suddenly more pronounced without Vanessa's presence as buffer and catalyst. "That was," he began, then paused, seemingly unsure how to characterize what had just transpired. "Unexpected," I supplied. "Illuminating." He nodded, fingers tracing patterns on the tablecloth in a gesture I recognized from our marriage. A physical manifestation of thoughts being carefully ordered before expression. "There's something else I should tell you," he said finally. "Since we're having honest conversations." I tensed slightly, wondering what further revelation could follow the significant disclosures of recent days. "I'm listening. I've been offered a position at Meridian in Chicago, executive sous chef under Helena Torres." He kept his eyes on the tablecloth rather than my face. "They approached me after the James Beard nominations were announced. Apparently, my work at Lumière has rehabilitated my professional reputation enough for Helena to take a chance." The news landed with unexpected impact. Meridian was a prestigious restaurant, Torres a celebrated chef known for mentoring culinary talent. It represented a legitimate path back into the upper echelons of the culinary world, not at the level Alex had once occupied, but a respectful re-entry that acknowledged both his past failures and current redemption. "That's a significant opportunity," I said carefully, processing my complicated reaction. "When would you start?" "That's just it," he replied, finally meeting my gaze. "I haven't accepted." I frowned slightly, confused by his hesitation. 6 months ago, when I'd hired him, such an offer would have seemed miraculous. An escape route from the humiliation of working under his ex-wife's direction, a chance to rebuild his career away from daily reminders of his personal and professional failures. Why not? It's clearly a step up from line cook at Lumière. Something shifted in his expression. Vulnerability, perhaps, or resignation. Because of Michelle. Because moving to Chicago would mean seeing him only during school breaks and holidays. Because he hesitated, then continued with careful precision. Because I'm finally learning how to be the father he deserves, and I don't want to interrupt that process for professional advancement. The simple declaration, delivered without dramatic emphasis or expectation of praise, revealed the depth of change more clearly than any previous evidence. The Alex who had once prioritized career above all else, who had missed milestone after milestone in our son's early development, was now placing Michelle's well-being above a prestigious career opportunity. "You could negotiate visits," I suggested, testing his commitment. "Fly back every few weekends. Many divorced parents manage long-distance arrangements." "They do," he acknowledged. "And if there were no alternatives, I'd make that work. But there are alternatives. Helena has agreed to hold the offer for 3 months while I consider, and there are other kitchens in Boston where I could continue rebuilding. Just not Lumière," I said, understanding the unspoken implication. After this conversation, after the blurred boundaries of recent weeks, continuing our current arrangement seemed increasingly untenable. "That's for you to decide," Alex replied. "I've valued these 6 months more than you might realize, not just for the second chance professionally, but for the opportunity to see you in your element, thriving in the role you were always meant to have." A ghost of a smile crossed his features. "It's been humbling in all the ways I needed." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of potential futures pressing around us. There had been a time when I'd dreamed of such an acknowledgement from Alex, recognition of my culinary vision, validation of my professional path. Now that it had arrived, I found myself questioning whether vindication was truly what I'd been seeking all along. "What do you want, Alex?" I asked directly. "Beyond maintaining your relationship with Michelle, professionally, personally, what are you working toward?" He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, the impulsive reactions of his former self replaced by thoughtful contemplation. "Professionally, I want to cook with integrity again, not for accolades or recognition, but with respect for the craft and the ingredients. Working at Lumière has reminded me why I became a chef in the first place, before ego and ambition corrupted it." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Personally, I want to be worthy of the second chances I've been given. With Michelle, certainly. With my sobriety. With the culinary community that has every reason to doubt me. Another pause. Longer, this time. And perhaps eventually with you. The last words hung between us, their ambiguity both deliberate and meaningful. Not a declaration of lingering romantic feelings, not a presumptuous assumption of reconciliation, but an acknowledgement of a connection that had been fundamentally altered, yet not entirely severed. Not as we were, he clarified, reading the complexity in my expression. That marriage was built on inequality and my insecurity. But perhaps, someday, as the people we're becoming, you in your well-earned success, me in my ongoing recovery. The suggestion should have seemed absurd given our history, given the public humiliation and private pain he had caused. Yet sitting across from this version of Alex, humbled, self-aware, genuinely committed to Michelle's well-being, I found I couldn't dismiss the possibility outright, couldn't cling to the certainty that had sustained me through 2 years of rebuilding. That's a significant leap from line cook to... I gestured vaguely, unable to articulate exactly what he was proposing. It is, he agreed. And I'm not asking for anything now except honesty. If there's no potential path forward beyond co-parenting, I need to know that, for my plans with Meridian, for my own emotional clarity. The question demanded a level of introspection I'd been avoiding for months, forcing me to examine the complicated emotions that had emerged as Alex proved himself changed in ways I'd never anticipated. The professional respect that had gradually replaced contempt. The co-parenting cooperation that had evolved beyond bare civility to genuine collaboration. The moments of connection that had caught me off guard. His recognition of my culinary vision, his dedication to Michelle, his willingness to accept accountability without excuse. I don't know, I admitted finally. 6 months ago, I would have said absolutely not, under any circumstances. Now, I shook my head slightly. I need time, Alex. This is all happening very quickly. Of course, he said immediately, no pressure, or disappointment in his tone. Take whatever time you need. I've already told Helena I won't have an answer about Chicago for at least a month. As we prepared to leave the cafe, practical questions reasserted themselves through the emotional complexity. What about tomorrow's service? Should we maintain the current arrangement until you decide about Meridian? Alex considered this, professional pragmatism tempering the personal disclosures of our conversation. I think that's best, if you're comfortable with it. The Richards wedding is this weekend, and we've already finalized the menu featuring several of my preparations. The reminder of ongoing professional commitments, of a restaurant that continued operating regardless of personal revelations, provided welcome grounding after the intensity of our discussion. Agreed. We maintain professional boundaries at Lumière while I process everything we've discussed. We walked together toward the parking area, the afternoon sun casting long shadows as it descended toward evening. At my car, Alex paused, a different kind of hesitation in his demeanor. There's one more thing I'd like to ask, he said. Would you and Michelle join me for dinner next Sunday? Not at Lumière or any restaurant, at my apartment. I'd like to cook for both of you, away from professional contexts. The invitation represented another boundary crossing, another step into undefined territory. Yet after the revelations of recent days, maintaining artificial distance seemed increasingly pointless. I'll ask Michelle, I replied, neither accepting nor refusing outright. He'd probably enjoy seeing where you live now. Alex nodded, understanding that this represented progress, however incremental. Thank you. For today, for the past 6 months he gestured vaguely, encompassing the complex journey we'd navigated. All of it. As I drove home, mind swirling with new information and possibilities, I realized that the neat narrative I'd constructed around our failed marriage, the villainous husband, the victimized wife, The triumphant professional vindication had been comforting in its simplicity, but insufficient in its humanity. The truth, as always, contained more complexity, more capacity for growth, more potential for redemption than I'd allowed myself to consider. The Richards' wedding reception unfolded with flawless precision, every plate emerging from Lumiere's kitchen exactly as planned, each course timed perfectly to complement the celebration's rhythm. From my position overlooking the pass, I watched Alex work alongside the rest of my team, his movements economical and focused as he prepared the pea and crab appetizer that had become the event's most requested dish. I'd maintained professional distance since our cafe conversation, our interactions limited to necessary communication about menu execution and timing. Yet something had shifted beneath the surface, an unspoken acknowledgement of truths finally voiced after years of silence. Each time our eyes met across the kitchen, each time he presented a plate for my inspection, I felt the weight of that new understanding between us. "Final dessert course ready to go," Nathan announced, sliding the last tray of individual chocolate soufflés into position. "Service is ahead of schedule, and the bride's mother has complimented the kitchen 3 times already." "Excellent work. Everyone," I called, surveying my team with genuine pride. "Let's finish strong and clean as we go. I want breakdown to be efficient tonight." As the kitchen transitioned into its final phase, plating desserts while beginning cleanup preparations, I found myself beside Alex at the sink, where he was meticulously cleaning his station. "The appetizer was the highlight," I said, keeping my voice professional despite the personal undercurrents flowing beneath our conversation. "Several guests requested the recipe." "Your concept, my execution," he replied, the simple attribution of credit still striking in its contrast to our married dynamic. "It worked because we each contributed our strengths." The observation could have applied equally to cooking or co-parenting, the dual contexts hanging unaddressed between us. Before I could respond, Emma approached with final guest counts and feedback, drawing me back into the immediate demands of service completion. Hours later, with the reception concluded and the kitchen restored to immaculate condition, I found myself in my office completing paperwork while the staff gathered for their traditional post-event drink. Through my partially open door, I could hear their celebratory conversation, the relaxation that came with successful execution of a high-pressure event. A knock drew my attention from inventory sheets. Alex stood in the doorway, chef's coat, exchanged for a simple button-down shirt, his expression hesitant. "The team is heading to McCready's for a proper celebration," he said. "Nathan wanted me to extend the invitation to you. In previous months, I would have declined automatically, maintaining the careful separation between my role as chef-owner and the staff's after-hours camaraderie. Tonight, with boundaries already blurring and definitions shifting, the familiar response felt unnecessarily rigid. "Give me 10 minutes to finish this paperwork," I heard myself saying. "I'll meet you all there." Surprise flickered across his features, quickly replaced by careful neutrality. "Great, I'll let them know." McCready's was the unofficial industry bar for Boston's culinary community, its worn wooden booths and comprehensive whiskey selection drawing kitchen staff from across the city after their shifts ended. I entered to find my team occupying a large corner section, Nathan already ordering a second round as Emma dramatically reenacted a near disaster with the wedding cake that had been averted through quick thinking. "Chef's here," someone called, and a space immediately cleared at the table, not at the head where authority might sit, but within the group itself, a subtle invitation to temporarily set aside hierarchy and join as colleague rather than boss. Slid into the offered space, accepting a glass of the champagne being passed around. "To the Richards' wedding," I proposed, raising my glass, "and to this exceptional team who executed it flawlessly." Cheers erupted, glasses clinked, and for the next hour I allowed myself the rare pleasure of simply being part of the collective rather than its leader. Conversation flowed easily, professional observations giving way to personal anecdotes, the camaraderie that develops in high-pressure kitchens, creating connections that transcended our varied backgrounds. Alex sat across the table, participating in the general conversation, but avoiding any interaction that might seem presumptuous, given our complicated history. His restraint, his careful navigation of our unusual situation, offered further evidence of the changes he'd described during our cafe conversation. The ongoing recovery that encompassed more than just sobriety. As the celebration continued, kitchen staff from other restaurants began filling surrounding tables, the informal industry gathering growing more animated as the evening progressed. I was considering my departure when a familiar voice called my name from across the room. Olivia Chen, the woman of the hour. I turned to find Marguerite Delaney approaching our table, her elegant presence immediately drawing attention even in this casual setting. At 72, she remained a commanding figure in Boston's culinary landscape, her endorsement still capable of making or breaking establishments. Marguerite, I greeted her, rising to accept her customary kiss on both cheeks. What brings you to Macready's at this hour? Celebration, she replied, gesturing to a nearby table where her protégée Clara sat with several other chefs. Clara's restaurant received its first Michelin star. I'm buying drinks for half the industry tonight. It seems. Congratulations circulated from our table to Clara's, the community's genuine pleasure and shared success characteristic of Boston's less cutthroat culinary scene. As conversations merged between tables, Marguerite took the seat beside me, her sharp gaze taking in our group with particular attention to Alex's presence among my staff. The Richards' wedding was a triumph, she commented, signaling for her preferred scotch. I've already received calls from 3 associates requesting Lumière for their upcoming events. We're fortunate to have such a skilled team, I replied, the inclusive phrasing deliberate rather than defaulting to individual credit. Marguerite's perceptive eyes missed nothing, her glance moving between me and Alex with considered assessment. Indeed, your kitchen functions with remarkable harmony these days, quite the evolution from 6 months ago. The observation contained layers of meaning, acknowledging both the professional integration and the personal history involved. Before I could formulate a suitably diplomatic response, she continued with characteristic directness. Alexander, I understand Meridian has made you an offer. Helena called to verify certain aspects of your recent work. Alex straightened slightly, surprise evident in his expression. She mentioned she might contact references. I didn't realize you were among them. I make it my business to maintain connections with serious establishments, Marguerite replied, her tone revealing nothing about the nature of her recommendation. Helena values my opinion on matters of character as well as technique. The conversation around us had quieted, the team's awareness of the significant professional dimensions at play creating a bubble of attentive silence around our exchange. Alex met Marguerite's evaluating gaze directly, neither defensive nor presumptuous. I hope your assessment was fair, if not favorable, he said finally. I understand I've created legitimate reasons for doubt. Marguerite's expression softened, marginally, approval flickering briefly across her features at his response. I endeavor to be accurate above all else. Time will tell whether Helena's faith proves warranted. She turned to me, changing subjects with deliberate abruptness. The James Beard Committee is holding a preliminary reception next month. You'll attend, of course. The professional opportunity represented by such networking was significant, yet I found myself hesitating, thinking of Michelle's weekend schedule and the standing arrangements for Alex's visitation. I'll need to coordinate childcare, but yes, I plan to attend. Bring Michelle, Marguerite suggested casually, though nothing about her recommendations was ever truly casual. The committee chairman adores children, and seeing the industry's next generation is always valuable perspective for those making decisions about its current leadership. Before I could respond to this unexpected suggestion, she continued, Alexander could accompany you both, providing appropriate support while you network. A family appearance would make a particular impression given the circumstances. The proposal hung in the air, its implications radiating outward like ripples in still water. Not just professional recognition of Alex's changed position, but public acknowledgement of our complicated family situation, presented not as scandal, but as evidence of maturity and growth. That would be... I searched for the appropriate response, finding none that adequately addressed all dimensions of her suggestion. Something to consider, Alex supplied carefully, neither presuming my agreement nor dismissing the professional opportunity, though Olivia would need to determine if that arrangement serves her best interests. Marguerite's gaze shifted between us, her assessment encompassing more than just professional calculations. Indeed, considerations of all kinds must be balanced. She finished her scotch and rose with elegant efficiency. The invitation will arrive next week. I look forward to seeing Michelle regardless of accompanying arrangements. I stood in Alex's apartment doorway, Michelle's hand clasped in mine, taking in the modest one-bedroom he now called home. The space was notably different from the sleek downtown condominium we'd shared during our marriage, smaller, simpler, yet thoughtfully arranged. Cookbooks lined carefully installed shelves, a small but well-equipped kitchen dominated the main living area, and colorful drawings in Michelle's distinctive style had been framed and prominently displayed on several walls. "Daddy?" Michel released my hand to launch himself at Alex, who crouched to receive the enthusiastic embrace. "I brought my special chef jacket to cook with you." "Perfect timing," Alex replied, his face lighting with genuine pleasure as he helped. Michel unpacked the miniature chef's coat from his backpack. I saved all the important jobs for my best sous chef. I remained at the threshold, oddly hesitant to step fully into this space that represented Alex's new life, the tangible evidence of his changed circumstances, and perhaps his changed self. He looked up from helping Michel with his jacket, sensing my hesitation. "Please, come in," he offered, his tone carefully casual as he gestured toward the small dining table already set for 3. "Everything's nearly ready, just some final assembly Michel can help with." The apartment smelled wonderful, herbal and citrusy with underlying notes of something slow-roasted. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me and accepting the glass of sparkling water Alex offered. No wine, I noted. Another small but significant indicator of his commitment to sobriety. "I didn't know you had all my pictures on your wall," Michel observed, noticing the framed artwork. "Even the dinosaur chef one from Christmas." "Of course," Alex replied, guiding him toward the kitchen counter where ingredients were neatly arranged. "For final preparation." "Those are my favorite things in the whole apartment." I moved closer to examine the display, recognizing drawings from various stages of Michelle's development. Some I'd sent during the periods when Alex's contact had been inconsistent, others more recent from his regular visitation weekends. The careful preservation and prominent placement spoke volumes about priorities that had fundamentally shifted since our marriage. "He keeps a folder of everything you create," I commented, the observation emerging before I'd fully considered its implications. "At the restaurant, too, the staff has seen every art project from the past 6 months." Alex glanced up from where he was helping Michel arrange herb garnishes on small plates of what appeared to be a deconstructed niçoise salad. "He's talented," he said simply, creative like his mother. The compliment, delivered without expectation or agenda, contrasted sharply with the competitive dynamic that had characterized our marriage. When any praise for me had seemed to diminish him, when acknowledging my contributions had felt impossible for him. "What are we making?" I asked, moving toward the kitchen to join their preparation. "We're doing a tasting menu," Michel announced importantly, clearly repeating terminology he'd heard at Lumière. "With lots of little plates instead of big ones." 5 courses, Alex clarified, carefully supervising as Michel placed a perfect quail egg atop each salad arrangement. Simple classics executed with attention to detail. the foundation of good cooking, as you've always maintained. Another, acknowledgement of my culinary philosophy, casually integrated into conversation rather than presented as revelation. These small recognitions continued to catch me off guard, each one dismantling another brick in the wall of certainty I'd built around my understanding of our failed relationship. Dinner progressed with surprising ease, Michelle's presence creating a natural bridge across potentially awkward silences. The food was exceptional, not showy or technically complicated, but perfectly executed dishes that honored traditional techniques while incorporating subtle personal touches. I recognized elements influenced by my own cooking style, alongside classical preparations Alex had always executed brilliantly, the combination creating something that felt balanced in ways our marriage never had. "This is delicious," I acknowledged. After the third course, a perfectly prepared risotto with spring vegetables that Michelle had helped stir. "You've maintained your technical precision but with more restraint." Alex nodded, understanding the layers in my observation. "Working at Lumière has been educational in ways I didn't anticipate. Watching how you balance innovation with accessibility, how you prioritize flavor over ego, it's fundamentally changed my approach." "Chef Olivia is the best," Michelle declared loyally, scraping the last bits of risotto from his plate. "But Daddy makes good food too." The simple, childish assessment, free from the complicated adult dynamics surrounding it, made both of us smile. For a moment, we were simply two parents appreciating our son's innocent perspective. A glimpse of what might have been had our marriage been built on mutual respect rather than competition. After dinner, Michelle insisted on giving me a tour of the apartment, proudly showing off the small guest room Alex had established primarily for his weekend stays, complete with dinosaur bedding and a small collection of toys. The care taken with this space, designed entirely around Michelle's comfort rather than as an afterthought, provided further evidence of priorities genuinely shifted. "And look, Mommy, Daddy has pictures of us everywhere." Michelle pointed out photographs on bedside tables and bookshelves, images of him at various ages, several including me at restaurant openings or food events before our marriage imploded. One photo in particular caught my attention, not displayed prominently, but placed on Alex's desk in the corner of the living room. It showed the three of us at Michelle's second birthday, before the worst of our marital problems, all smiling against the backdrop of the small catering kitchen where I'd been building my business. A moment of genuine family connection preserved from the wreckage of what followed. "That was a good day," Alex said quietly, noticing my attention on the photograph. "One of many I didn't appreciate properly at the time." Michelle had moved on to showing me his dedicated drawer in the kitchen where Alex kept special cooking tools just for his use, his excited chatter providing cover for a more adult exchange. "Why keep it?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. "Why remind yourself of what was lost?" Alex considered the question with the thoughtful deliberation that still surprised me after the impulsive reactions that had characterized our marriage. "Not as self-punishment, if that's what you're thinking, more as perspective, a reminder of what matters, of what I sacrificed for things that ultimately weren't important." Before I could respond, Michelle bounded back to us, full of 5-year-old energy despite the late hour. "Can we have dessert now? Daddy said there's chocolate thing with special sauce." The moment for deeper conversation passed, replaced by the practical logistics of serving dessert and managing a gradually fading child. By the time we'd finished the promised chocolate soufflés with crème anglaise, Michelle helping to pour the sauce with careful concentration, his energy was visibly waning despite valiant efforts to hide his tiredness. "I think someone needs to head home for bedtime," I observed, gathering our dessert dishes as Michelle unsuccessfully tried to stifle a yawn. "But I want to stay and cook more with Daddy," he protested, even as his eyes grew heavy. "We were going to make breakfast plans for next time. We'll have plenty of time for that on our next weekend," Alex assured him, gently helping him out of his chef's jacket. Chefs need proper rest to do their best work, remember? Alex walked us to the door, Michelle half asleep against his shoulder, after insisting on one more goodnight hug that had turned into a drowsy cuddle. The evening had revealed dimensions of Alex I was still reconciling with the husband I'd divorced, patient, attentive, humble in ways that seemed fundamentally authentic rather than strategically performed. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly as he transferred our sleepy son to my arms. "It meant a lot to have you both here." "The dinner was wonderful," I acknowledged. "You've created a real home for him here." Something vulnerable flickered across Alex's features. "I'm trying to be the father he deserves, the person I should have been all along." Michelle stirred slightly against my shoulder, murmuring something about dinosaur pancakes before settling back into near sleep. The weight of him, solid and warm, grounded me in the present moment, in the reality of our shared responsibility for this small person regardless of our complicated past. "I've been thinking about Marguerite's suggestion," I said, the words emerging before I'd fully planned them. "About the James Beard reception." Alex waited, neither presuming nor dismissing, another subtle change from the man who would once have immediately asserted his preferred outcome. "I think she's right that Michelle would enjoy it," I continued carefully. "And having support with him would allow me to network more effectively. I'd be happy to help however you think best," he offered, no hint of the resentment that once would have accompanied being cast in a supporting role. "Whether that means staying with Michelle here while you attend or accompanying you both as suggested." The open-ended offer, prioritizing my professional opportunity without expectation, crystallized something I'd been gradually recognizing over recent weeks. The Alex standing before me, having prepared a thoughtful meal for his son, having acknowledged my culinary influence, having rebuilt his life around recovery and fatherhood rather than ego and ambition, was someone I was still getting to know. Someone distinct from the husband whose betrayal had shattered our marriage. "I think," I said slowly, "that we should attend as Marguerite suggested. The three of us, as a family unit. Not because we're reconciling romantically, but because we're learning to build something new around Michelle's well-being and our mutual respect." Relief and cautious hope mingled in Alex's expression. "I'd like that. And I understand the boundaries you're establishing." As I turned to leave, balancing Michelle's sleeping weight, I felt compelled toward one final honesty. "I don't know what the future holds for us, Alex. I'm still processing everything we've discussed, still reconciling the man you're becoming with the husband I divorced, but I'm open to possibilities I wouldn't have considered 6 months ago." "That's more than I deserve," he acknowledged quietly, "and more than enough to move forward with." In the car, driving home with Michel asleep in his booster seat, I found myself reflecting on the phrase that had catalyzed our entire journey. Better in every way. Words wielded as weapons at our anniversary dinner, intended to diminish and wound. Words that had fueled my determination to prove my worth, to build something extraordinary from the ashes of humiliation. Now those same words carried different meaning. Better didn't mean comparison against others, but against our former selves. Better meant growth, accountability, the humility to acknowledge mistakes, and the courage to attempt repair. Better meant prioritizing our child's well-being over ego, choosing collaboration over competition. As I glanced at Michel in the rearview mirror, his face peaceful in sleep, I recognized that better wasn't a destination, but a direction. A commitment to continuous improvement rather than perfect achievement. Perhaps that was the most valuable lesson emerging from the painful journey of the past 2 years. Not that I was better than Vanessa, or that Alex was better than he had been, but that we were all capable of becoming better versions of ourselves when we abandoned the need to prove superiority over others. Better, I decided, watching the city. Lights blur gently as we drove home, was possibility rather than judgment. And possibilities, unlike the past, remained unwritten. The James Beard reception buzzed with culinary royalty, conversations about sustainable sourcing and heritage techniques flowing as freely as the champagne. I navigated the crowd with practiced ease, Michelle's hand in mine, Alex a respectful step behind us, present but not presuming, supportive without overshadowing. "Olivia Chen," called a food critic whose review had helped launch Lumière, the woman who's redefining fusion cuisine in Boston. As we chatted, Michelle grew restless, whispering something to Alex, who nodded and led him toward a display of elaborately plated desserts. I watched them go, struck by the natural way they moved together now. Alex crouching to explain each creation at Michelle's eye level, genuinely engaged rather than performing fatherhood for observers. "Quite the evolution," Marguerite commented, appearing beside me with her uncanny timing. Both professionally and personally. I followed her gaze to where Alex was now lifting Michelle for a better view, their matching profiles highlighted against the window. "We're finding our way," I acknowledged. "He declined Meridian's offer, you know," she said casually. Helena was quite disappointed. This was news to me. "When?" "Last week," said his priorities required him to remain in Boston. She sipped her champagne thoughtfully. "I've been considering opening a teaching kitchen. Master classes for serious culinary students. It would require someone with technical precision and humility to lead the practical sessions while I handle theory." The implication hung in the air between us. A position worthy of Alex's skills, but without the ego inflation of his former status. A way forward that would allow him to remain near Michelle while exiting the potentially complicated dynamic at Lumière. "Might be perfect for that," I said thoughtfully. Marguerite nodded. "People can surprise us, Olivia, sometimes even themselves." She gestured toward Alex and Michelle, returning with excitement over the desserts. "The question is what we do with those surprises,"